My name is Sylvia Johnson, and today I am going to be reviewing the Sunday School Lesson for Sunday, June the 8th. Our title for Sunday, June the 8th is Judgment on Israel and Judah. The Bible basis comes from Amos, the 2nd chapter, the 4th through the 8th verse. Our Bible truth: God will not overlook injustice, but will punish the unjust. Our memory verse: Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Judah, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they have despised the law of the Lord, and have not kept his commandments, and their lies caused them to err, after the which their fathers have walked. Amos, the 2nd chapter, the 4th verse. And that's your King James Version. The lesson aim: by the end of the lesson, your students will review God's judgment of Judah and Israel, encourage sensitivity towards social injustice, and address issues of injustice in their local and global communities. Once again, welcome. Thank you for joining me this evening. We are making a shift from the New Testament to the Old Testament, and we are entering into a section where I think we have multiple weeks on the prophets. And so this is our second week in the new quarter, and this week we start in Amos. And Amos was a prophet from the kingdom of Judah, which was the southern kingdom, who prophesied to Israel and Judah. And so something to go back and look at as you check out in your Bible. Your prophets are not in chronological order, when the whole book in chronological order. So you can kind of get confused if you're reading, because some of it will sound repetitive or redundant, or like it's backtracking. And so Amos was speaking of the future, of the slightly further future. And he was speaking to a people who were not in a mindset to receive what he was going to say, because he was speaking at a time where everything is awesome, right? If you've ever seen the Lego movie, everything is awesome. And so he was speaking to a people about the judgment of God at a time when everything for them looked great. They were prospering. Life was good. They had everything they want. But what we see is, with a lot of us, right? We have what we want and we don't know how to act with it. Or we have what we want and we use unjust ways to obtain it. And so it's a message that God sees. And he is, in his infinite wisdom, ready to move and act as he deems is necessary and just in defense of his name and his law and the way that he created the world to be. And so that's just something to think about as you're reading the book of Amos. He's a minor prophet. That even though he's speaking of these things that are coming, it would be a time before they happened. And, do you receive the word of God, regardless of what it looks like right now? If you think about it, when you're in a hard time and you hear the word from the Lord come forward talking to you about prosperity and all the things that he's going to do, and do you believe it then either? And then on the flip side, when you are living in prosperity and wellness and plenty, right? And you hear the judgment of God come forward, that you're going to lose some things and things are going to change, or he's going to hold you accountable for what you've done. Whatever situation you're in, when the word comes forward from the Lord, you better believe it. So with that, let's get into the lesson. So we are starting in Amos, the 2nd chapter, the 4th verse. And so the first few verses were judgments that God had for other kingdoms, not from the children of Israel. Moving forward, in the 4th verse, we pick up with Amos speaking the words of the Lord to the kingdom of Judah. And it says in Amos 2 and 4, Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Judah, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they have despised the law of the Lord, and have not kept his commandments, and their lies caused them to err, after the which their fathers have walked. And so this is our memory verse. And God is speaking and saying, these transgressions that they've done, right? And he's counting, letting them know, I'm watching what you do, and it's continuing, right? And so it says he will not turn away, and that's something really, really big to notice, right? Because I think we talked about this when we talked about the character of God and love, his loving kindness, right? His mercy, but it also says he will not. That will not keep the guilty from being judged, right? And so he has decided that they're guilty. In spite of his compassion and loving kindness and mercies renew every morning, he's looked at what they've done and they are guilty. And because of their guilt, he cannot come off of what he's determined is the right judgment for what they have done. And what have they done? They despise the law of the Lord. And the law, if we remember in the Old Testament, was given to them from God through Moses. And it was how they should live after they came out of Egypt. And they made the covenant with God to be his people. Now, when you, if you go back and look at the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, right? Don't make this pledge. Don't give this oath saying that you will be my people to no end without the fulfilling of what you pledged, okay? It's not how we think of it where we say, someone gets angry and they say, oh, gosh darn it, or something like that. What they're saying, what the Bible is teaching us is that when we claim the name of God, when we say we're his children, when we profess salvation, when they made that covenant with him, saying, all the things you have given us, this will do, you are then responsible for honoring that word. Because when you go in someone's name, and I think we've talked about this before, you're moving in their authority. You're their representation, right? Paul tells us that we are ambassadors, right? If any man be in Christ, he is a new creature, and all things are of God. Everything about me that's been made new is of God. I represent him through Christ. And so if I'm carrying his name in vain, I'm going to give a very poor representation of him, who he is, his power, his authority, his righteousness, his love, his justice. And so when they despised the law of him, they said, yeah, we're going to do all these things. And then they said, no, I'm not really going to do it. And I think, what is it? Mental assent, where you agree to do something and you're all for it, but when it's time to show up for the do, you totally separated yourself from it, right? You don't come through. And so it sounded good and you acted like you were all for it, but you're not really there for the doing. And so that's what they've done. In their actions, they've shown themselves to hate and to be against the law of God. And so they did not keep his commandments, and their lies caused them to err. And so the commandments that God gave, not just the 10, right? If you go back and you read Exodus, Leviticus, Number, Deuteronomy, you can see God teaching them the law while they're in the wilderness. So all the things that he told them they should do. And so to think about it, the law is your statutes, okay? If this, then that. In these situations, you do these things. If any man should whatever, then his repayment should be as such, okay? I think last year before, I was teaching the kids at church about statutes, and I asked them what time they go to bed in the school time, and then what time they go to bed in the summer, and then they all said, we go to bed when we want to. And I was like, okay, well, that's what's wrong. Y'all don't have no statutes. You need boundaries, right? You need guidance for what you do in every situation. God provided them that. Though that's the law. And then the commandments are your directives, right? Go this way. Don't touch this. Don't eat that. Be here on this day. Okay? Those are commandments, direct orders. All of those are examples and demonstrations of his wisdom, of his righteousness. Because if you look at especially the commandments and the statutes, right? It was always about bringing things back in order and back in balance and making sure that people were treated justly. And so you have your his wisdom, his power, his righteousness, and his love for his people, which we were supposed to represent. And they didn't keep that. He gave them a perfect law, and they were like, no, we're not going to do that. And it says their lies caused them to err. And so their lies are representative of the idolatry that they had. And so they did not believe the true God. They went after the things that they saw from the other nations. And so the lie, okay, that these things are okay, or it don't take all that in modern day terms, right? Or, this ain't so bad, or, what do we say now? Love is love, right? And all of that, it causes you to err. It causes you to get off track, to make a mistake in your actions and your judgments. And so they made the same mistakes their ancestors made. And so the same foolishness, the same falling after false teachings that their forefathers had done, the people of that day were yet doing. And God had had enough. And so he says in verse 5, but I will send a fire upon Judah, and it will devour the palaces of Jerusalem. And so I skipped over this, but I'll put it in the notes when I was talking about Amos and him being in the southern kingdom. So we do remember now that the kingdoms are split, right, at this point. After Solomon, his son, came into play, and this is in 1 Kings chapter 12. I'm not going to go all the way back and read that. But when his son came in, he offended the people. Someone took advantage of that and said, hey, here's your temple. Y'all can come worship up here. You don't have to go back to Jerusalem. And the kingdom's divided. And God forbade Judah from going and attacking their brothers. So that's why the kingdoms were split. Now, the fire, though, that came, that God had told them was coming, he said he would send a fire upon them and it would devour the palaces of Jerusalem. So remember I told you that Amos is speaking at a time where they were prosperous, right? Like, who gonna check me? Like, what you mean something gonna burn us up? I'm a child of the Most High God. Everything's gravy, right? Things are going great for me. Everything is awesome. No one's coming to burn us. We're undefeated, right? We're champions. We win. Everything I do, I win. So he's speaking a great destruction to a people at a time where it's just not fathomable that would happen. But if we go to I've got quite a few. So we're going to start in Jeremiah. Now, Jeremiah was also a prophet, but he was a prophet at the time where these things were actually happening. The judgment had arrived. And so if you go to Jeremiah 15:1, it says, then said the Lord unto me, though Moses and Samuel stood before me, yet my mind could not be toward this people. Cast them out of my sight and let them go forth. And so remember, Amos had said, I will not turn away the punishment thereof. So at the time when judgment is coming, God reiterates his certainty that the judgment will be done. Okay, even if Moses and Samuel, all the great faithfuls, came and pleaded with me. Remember, Moses interceded for the people in the wilderness when they was singing and dancing with the golden calf, right? And so then God, he turned from his wrath. But what God is saying is, these people are worse. Ain't no way we finna let this slide, okay? And in 15:2 it says, and it shall come to pass, if they say unto thee, whither shall we go forth? Then thou shalt tell them, thus saith the Lord, such as are for death to death, and such as are for the sword to the sword, and such as are for the famine to the famine, and such as are for the captivity to the captivity. And I will appoint over them 4 kinds, saith the Lord, the sword to slay, the dogs to tear, the fowls of the heaven, and the beasts of the earth to devour and destroy. And I will cause them to be removed into all kingdoms of the earth because of Manasseh, the son of Hezekiah, king of Judah, for that which he did in Jerusalem. And so, again, God saying, I'm going to destroy these people and to tear down the city and everything that's going to come is my judgment on them for what they've done. And he goes back to Manasseh. And so, since we're talking about Manasseh, for those of you who watch, why don't you just list to help catch people up? Because we could spend a whole night talking about the ways the children of Israel disobeyed God. And so if you, we can start with Manasseh if we want to, or you can start with some of the other kings, and go back into 1st and 2nd Kings and look and see what happened. And look at the ways that they disobeyed God and just list one in the comments. Sometimes we assume that people are very familiar with the Bible and that they just know what went wrong, right? Like something happened and God got mad. It must have been just this. But they had cycles and cycles and cycles of disobedient leaders and who caused the people to sin. And so what are some of the things that people did that's in the Bible that went against what God gave them in the law? And you can just pop a little note down there and put where they can find it in the Bible. And I think that will help people understand God's anger with the children of Israel and Judah at this time. And so God had issued judgment. And then if we continue in Jeremiah, let's see. In Jeremiah, they would not honor and obey the Sabbath in Jeremiah 17. So there's your one that I can give you. In Jeremiah 17, they would not honor the Sabbath and God was angry. And so God issued judgment on them. And it happened in 2 Kings 25:9. And in Jeremiah, you can also read it because remember I said Jeremiah was a prophet who was present for the fire. And we're going to go to 52. In Jeremiah 52:1, Zedekiah was 120-year-old when he began to reign. And he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. And he did that which was evil in the eyes of the Lord, according to all that Jehoiakim had done. So that's someone else you can look for if you don't know what went wrong. Jehoiakim. For through the anger of the Lord it came to pass in Jerusalem and Judah till he had cast them out from his presence, that Zedekiah rebelled the king of Babylon. And it came to pass in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, in the 10th day of the month, that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came, he and all his army, against Jerusalem, and pitched against it and built forts against it round about. So the city was besieged until the 11th year of King Zedekiah, and in the 4th month, in the 9th day of the month, the famine was sore in the city, so that there was no bread for the people of the land. Then the city was broken up, and all the men of war fled, and went forth out of the city by night, by the way of the gate between the two walls, which was by the king's garden. Now the Chaldeans were by the city round about, and they went by the way of the plain. So if we keep going, the men of war ran away. The Chaldeans caught them, drugged them back, took Zedekiah, killed his sons, put his eyes out, and drug him into captivity and burnt down the city. Okay? The fire, okay, destroyed the temple, destroyed the palace. The Chaldeans, the Babylonians, tore down the walls of the city that were supposed to protect them, right? They dismantled them. And so you see that God's judgment came just as he said it was, and the city went up in flames. Nebuchadnezzar drug out plenty of people and replanted them somewhere else in Babylon and left a few people to tend the grounds and the vines. Totally destroyed and dismantled a city that was prosperous, a city that thought they could forever reign in the name of the Lord, but still straddle the fence and do what they wanted to do. A people who, even up to that point, Jeremiah was trying to tell them what was coming. They would not believe him and would not receive it. And so, coming back to the lesson, one, you see that Amos was a true prophet because what he spoke came. And you also see that it's important to God what he gives us to do, how he gives us to live, that his law and his commandments are his righteousness in the earth. And it's his wisdom and his right judgment. And so when he gives to you to live a certain way and to do a certain thing, it's to your best interest to do so because you do it as a representative of him. So moving on, if we continue, that was the kingdom of Judah. Then he moves on to Israel. So we're in Amos, the 2nd chapter, the 6th verse. Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Israel, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof. So he has the same introduction as he had before with Judah. Because they have sold the righteous for silver, and the poor for a pair of shoes, that pant after the dust of the earth on the head of the poor, and turn aside the way of the meek, and a man and his father will go in unto the same maid, to profane my holy name. So now he's talking to Israel, the northern kingdom. Judah was, if you remember, the 12 tribes of Israel. Judah was Benjamin and Judah. And then the other 10 kingdoms, or the other 10 tribes, made up the northern kingdom. And so all of them is who he's speaking to now. And he says he's looking at how they treat people, those who are poor, those who don't have resources, right? They sold the righteous for silver. They were selling people, slaves could be purchased and bought for crimes or for debts or for, to make things right. But what he's saying, they sold the righteous. You sold people who should not have been sold. You sold people that didn't owe you anything. You sold people who had broken no laws. You sold people who were innocent and were minding their own business, and you made them slaves. Then he said, and the poor for a pair of shoes. The people who could not do for themselves, you took them to get things for your own personal gain, like a pair of shoes. A person's life, their freedom for shoes. And remember, we're looking at, injustice, right? And righteous living. You cannot live righteously and not have regard for others. It's not possible. Can't do it. In fact, and I said this before, the whole law was about how to honor your God and how to love his people. That's it. That's why Jesus said, when they asked him, what were the greatest commandments? To love your God with all your heart, with all your might, with all your soul, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And so here is the representation of God, right? His children, right? Who were supposed to come into the promised land and be the image of him in the earth. And the image that they are portraying is selfishness, greed, and injustice. And that's not who he is. So we continue on. It says that pant after the dust of the earth on the head of the poor, and turn aside the way of the meek, and a man and his father will go in unto the same maid. And so again, more injustice, right? Turn aside the way of the meek. The person who is humble and lowly, right? You're not following after that. Your way is pride. Your way is aggression and arrogance, not the way of the meek. And it says, a man and his father will go in into the same maid. Well, now look, y'all weren't supposed to do that. Sexual morality was a good section in the law. Okay, it wasn't something he skipped over. It was not something that he missed. He was very clear about who you were and were not to intimately engage with, and when you were supposed to do so. And so we think in modern times that anything goes, right? And that goes back to turning aside the way of the meek. I'm God. I'm a God. I am God-like. I am this. I am that. I can have what I want, right? I can be what I want to be. I go for my own. We talked about that 2 weeks ago, I think, when we were talking about the way of love. Seeketh not its own, right? We're not here solely for personal gain. But in modern times, whatever feels good to me, right, is what I go for. If I lust after this or desire after that, if I'm hungry for this, I don't care who I have to trample on, steal from, cut down, lie about, undercut to get it done. That is not righteous living. And it's so easy when you're in a position, because again, Israel also was in a prosperous position, right? It's so easy when you're in a good position to look at yourself and have a false sense of security. I'm fine. Who's gonna take this from me? I'm doing everything I can do, and I'm gonna do even more before I get done. And so thinking like that is not righteous. God is not pleased when we harm others. We need to look at our interactions and our own desires and who we sacrifice in pursuit of them. And here where he talks about a man and his father will go in into the same maid, sexual desires will get you in trouble. And so here in the law, if we go to Leviticus 18, God said, 18:1, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, I am the Lord your God. After the doings of the land of Egypt, wherein ye dwelt, shall ye not do. And after the doings of the land of Canaan, whither I bring you, shall ye not do. Neither shall ye walk in their ordinances. Ye shall do my judgments and keep mine ordinances to walk therein. I am the Lord your God. So he tells them where I brought you from, because they had lived in Egypt for, was it 400 years, right? When you live amongst some other people, you learn other people things. And so remember, the children of Israel weren't a righteous people in Egypt. They had to be made righteous. And so they picked up some Egypt behavior. And what God was saying is, don't do what you learned back there. Whatever practices that were good there, whatever chants, idols, things, activities, don't do that. And when you get to Canaan, the things that you see that those people do, don't do that. Do what I tell you to do. I'm your God. I'm the one who reigns over you. I'm the one you've submitted your life to. Do what I teach you. And I didn't go back and reference that, but he even told them, don't practice this. It'll be a snare for you. It's a trap. It'll catch you. You'll get tangled up in that. Don't do that. And so from there, it talks about what he considered unlawful sexual relations. And I won't read all of them because it's a lot of them, but any connected sexual act with someone who was of close kin to you was absolutely not okay. And you could not do that. Your father's whatever, your son's whatever, your mother's sister, your mother's daughter with someone else, no. You could not have interactions sexually with those people. And then if you go on to Leviticus 20, it says in 20 and 11, and the man that lieth with his father's wife hath uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. And if a man lie with his daughter-in-law, both of them shall surely be put to death. They have wrought confusion. Their blood shall be upon them. And so God was really clear on what sexual purity was. And it was important to him that his people did not get confused in those acts. But he says here that they're doing it, right? In Amos 2 and 7, he says they're doing it. And they profane my holy name. Again, you're supposed to be the people of God, what he has made holy. And then he himself is holy, right? But you make him to appear vulgar and defiled and unclean when you do acts as his representatives in the earth that he has said not to do. And so in 8, it says, and they lay themselves down upon clothes laid to pledge by every altar, and they drink the wine of the condemned in the house of their God. So we got to go back to the law. If we're in Exodus, okay, Exodus 22. Exodus, the 22nd chapter, the 26th verse. If thou at all take thy neighbor's raiment to pledge, his raiment, his clothing, thou shalt deliver it unto him by that the sun goeth down. for that is his covering only. It is his raiment for his skin, wherein shall he sleep? And it shall come to pass when he crieth unto me that I will hear, for I am gracious. So, if someone owed you something, or they made an oath or a pledge, right? And they promised on their cloak. Now, remember back then, people didn't have an abundance of possessions all the time. They had what they carried with them. They were a migrating people, right? They didn't have cars and collateral and bank accounts and all of that. And so if he pledged just what he had on his back and he had nothing else, you were supposed to give it back to him. You didn't leave your neighbor in nakedness. So what was more important than your debt was the well-being of your neighbor. But if you kept his cloak, what would he wear? How would he be warm? How would he cover himself? How would he be presentable? And so you have to remember that what's more important is the welfare of your neighbor. But what God said they were doing in Amos is they were coming to the altar, performing not clean acts. And you were doing it in the stuff that you were holding illegally for someone that you should have returned it to. Like God couldn't see you, right? Like God didn't know you didn't give Bob his one and only cloak back. And so it seems like a small thing, right? Like, well, he owed me. That's not justice. And that's the sad part of how we as people think. And it's not just how people think today. You see in this lesson that that's how people in the Bible thought. I think I'm entitled or justified in what I decided to do when I balance things out with my heavily weighted in my favor scale. When I am seeking my own, right? I'm justified. What I did was right. They owed me. They never paid me back. I deserve this. And so it's important to note that God promised that if the person you wronged cried out to him, he'd hear them because he's gracious. He's compassionate. His loving kindness fails not. Even when he's angry and his wrath has been provoked, he's still gracious to those who need him. And so you have to remember that. The children of Israel cried out. Their cries came up to him when they were in bondage. And so they weren't a righteous people then. But their cries came up to him because he is a righteous God. And so they're at the altar. And it says, it says by every altar. So they're at any altar where you can make any sacrifice. So they may be engaging in pagan activities. They may be performing the rituals of the law. Makes no difference to them. I'm going to do what I do, right? But he sees them. And it says, and they drink the wine of the condemned in the house of their God. And so if we go back, we'll go forward actually. Paul told us in 1 Corinthians, right, that when they were drinking, we're going to 1 Corinthians 10, when he gives them he puts up the comparison when he's talking about when you drink the wine for communion, right? You're partakers of the body and the blood of Christ. Okay, well, you can't be participating in the idol feasts and the idol drinking, right? And he says in 1 Corinthians 10, and we'll start at 21, you cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of devils. You cannot be partakers of the Lord's table and of the table of devils. Do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than he? And so he's bringing up then what people were doing back then, right? Even though people will say, well, we don't live after the law. No, you don't have to follow the law as each individual tenant, but you have to learn what the law was trying to teach you, right? That God wants righteous living, that God wants holy living, and God wants us to be faithful to him. And so in being faithful to him, that means I honor what he says is right. And I'm not dibbling and dabbling in other faiths and other practices. I'm not engaging in idolatry or unholy sexual acts, right? And so all of that is injustice. Because even in your engaging in the sexual acts that they used in here, where he was talking about the son and the father going to the same maid, there's a power play there, right? When someone is a servant to you, or an innocent, vulnerable person in a vulnerable position, are they in a position where they can tell you no? Or are they being taken advantage of? And so you've got a lot of abuse going here from people who have arrived and perceive themselves as able to do whatever it is that they want to do and still meet the I'm a believer checklist, right? And so compare that to how we are today. Yeah, I go to church. Yeah, I play gospel music. Yeah, I pay my tithes and offering, but you still treat people any kind of way, right? You still undermining the people who work for you at your job. You don't treat your neighbors right. You're wrongfully suing people. The 1-800, I'm not going to say which, I call them the ambulance chasers. But those people you're always trying to get over on somebody on a lawsuit. Now, all of that is injustice. You cannot be righteous. You cannot be right with God and not be right with people. It cannot be done. So we have to look at what's going on in our lives. How are we treating people? How are we living before him? Do we obey what he said is good and what he said is right? Are we like him, right? Or do we profane his name? So going back to the Sunday school lesson, it says review God's judgment of Judah and Israel. And so we talked about how God had issued judgment on both places and was not going to turn away. And we know, if we don't know, I'm going to tell you now, that the Assyrians did come and take all of the northern kingdom into exile. And then later, Babylon came and destroyed Judah. Encourage sensitivity towards social injustice. I hope I did that. But more importantly, not just be sensitive to it, but you need to check yourself sometimes. Am I being unjust? Is this pleasing to God? We used to wear those "What would Jesus do" bracelets, but realistically speaking, look at how you're treating people. Look at how you handle someone who is poor or someone who can't access the resources that you have. Are you trying to keep them down? Sometimes in our it's in our faulty thinking, right? Like there's not enough God for everybody. And so I got to save what's here for me. I can't let them get some, because if they get too much, I won't have enough. And that's back to our Cain and Abel situation. Like God can favor my brother. He can favor me later too. And we'll both be fine, right? But we don't think like that. And so there is enough God for you to be prosperous, or for you to be taken care of, for you to have your provisions, and for your brother to have provisions. But if what you think God has provided means you have to take it from someone else, you're not thinking justly. And then address issues of injustice in their local and global communities. Well, it starts with you. Let's do that first. If we fix ourselves and then we do what Paul calls us to do, and that's be ambassadors for Christ, then we can move to addressing those injustices and living as witnesses for him. So that's today's lesson. As of right now, I don't think I'll be teaching next Friday, so please forgive me. But I do plan to be back on the Friday after. If you do see me next Friday, it'll be a surprise to me too. But if you have any questions, please let me know. And if you forget, the suggestion that I made at the beginning, speaking of the judgments of Israel, instead of me going through all the things that went wrong, can you just take a moment and list some of the things that they did that were against what God taught them when they came into the promised land, so that someone who may not know all the happenings in that period can understand why God was so angry with his people. So, and it'll also help you kind of look at yourself, because a lot of the things they did, people are doing today. And we really need to look at that and stop ourselves from engaging in all of those behaviors, because no, everything is not okay, and no, anything does not go. So with that being said, I hope you all enjoyed the lesson. Stay blessed, and I will see you prayerfully in 2 weeks for Sunday school. Bye-bye.